Greetings, friends. A pregnant woman stood outside in the middle of heavy rain while her own husband locked the door against her and chose another woman over her. That same man never imagined that 5 years later, he would fall to his knees crying in front of the woman he once threw away like trash. Watch until the end, because at the end we reveal the secret that changed this poor abandoned woman into one of the most respected and powerful women in Africa. But before that, please write in the comments where you are from. Hopefully those who have liked and subscribed to this channel will always be given health and have their fortunes smooth, their debts paid off. Amen. The rain started before midnight. Heavy water hit the glass windows of the luxury apartment while loud music played inside. Expensive drinks covered the table. Laughter filled the room. The air conditioner hummed softly while people danced carelessly under dim golden lights. But outside that same apartment building, a pregnant woman stood alone in the cold. Adesuwa Daniels held her stomach tightly with one hand while rainwater soaked her clothes completely. Her small travel bag rested beside her feet near the staircase. Her breathing shook badly, not because of the weather, but because her husband had just thrown her out of the house they once built together. She stared at the apartment door upstairs with swollen eyes. Her face looked pale and tired. She had been crying for hours already, but the tears refused to stop. Inside that apartment was the man who once promised to protect her forever. Kelvin Obi. The same man who used to trek with her under the hot Lagos sun because they could not afford transport money. The same man who once held her hands and swore that no matter how poor they became, he would never abandon her. Now he could not even let her sleep inside while carrying his child. Another loud burst of laughter echoed from upstairs. Adesuwa slowly climbed the wet staircase again. Her legs felt weak. Her slippers made soft sounds against the water-covered steps as she reached the door. She knocked gently at first. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. The music inside reduced slightly. She heard movement near the door before Kelvin suddenly opened it halfway. Warm air rushed from inside the apartment. Kelvin looked annoyed immediately. His white designer shirt was half unbuttoned. Gold chains rested on his neck. Behind him, colorful lights flashed across the sitting room while people drank and danced carelessly. When he saw Adesuwa standing there again, his face hardened instantly. "I thought I told you to leave." His voice sounded cold. Completely different from the man she married. Rainwater dripped from Adesuwa's hair onto the floor. "Kelvin, please," she whispered weakly. "It's raining heavily outside. Let me stay till morning. I'm not asking for anything else." Kelvin glanced behind him nervously before lowering his voice. "Don't embarrass me tonight." Adesuwa looked confused by those words. "Embarrass you?" Before Kelvin could answer, another voice entered from inside. A woman's voice. Soft. Mocking. Annoying. "Baby, why are you still talking to her?" Vanessa Cole appeared behind Kelvin holding a wine glass in one hand. Her long silky dress sparkled under the light. Her makeup looked perfect. Everything about her screamed money and comfort. She stopped when she saw Adesuwa standing there. Then her lips slowly curved into a smile that carried no kindness. "Oh? She's still here." Adesuwa looked at her silently. Her chest tightened immediately. Vanessa walked closer and leaned against the door casually. "I thought you said she already left." Kelvin sighed impatiently. "She refuses to understand." Vanessa looked directly at Adesuwa's stomach before laughing softly. "You poor girls always think pregnancy can force a man to stay." Adesuwa felt the word stab deeply into her chest. For a moment she could not speak. This woman was standing inside her husband's apartment comfortably while she stood outside in the rain like a stranger. Adesuwa swallowed painfully. "Kelvin," she said slowly. "After everything we suffered together, this is what I deserve." Kelvin rubbed his forehead impatiently. "Please stop making this difficult." "Difficult?" Her voice shook badly now. "I supported you when nobody believed in you." Vanessa rolled her eyes immediately. "Here we go again." Adesuwa ignored her completely. "When your business failed, who stayed beside you? When you had no food, who borrowed money so we could eat? When your landlord threw us out of that single-room apartment in Yoba, who slept beside you inside church because we had nowhere to go?" Kelvin's jaw tightened. "Enough." "No," Adesuwa continued emotionally. "You promised me things would get better. You promised this child would grow inside a happy home." Vanessa suddenly laughed loudly. "A happy home," she repeated mockingly. "Look at yourself. Adesuwa slowly turned toward her. Vanessa stepped forward confidently. You don't belong here anymore. Kelvin has moved on. Rich men don't stay with struggling local wives forever. The statement made Kelvin uncomfortable briefly, but he said nothing. And that silence hurt Adesuwa more than anything else. Because the man who once defended her proudly now stood quietly while another woman insulted her openly. Adesuwa looked directly at Kelvin again. You're allowing this? Kelvin avoided her eyes. I'm tired, Adesuwa. Tired of what? Tired of struggling. Tired of being dragged backward. Adesuwa stared at him in disbelief. Backward. Yes, he snapped suddenly. You don't understand the kind of life I want now. The rain became heavier outside. Water entered the hallway slowly. Kelvin lowered his voice again. Look around you. Things have changed. My business is growing. Important people know me now. I can't keep living like before. Adesuwa felt her heart break little by little. So now you're ashamed of me? Kelvin said nothing. That silence answered everything. Vanessa smiled proudly beside him. Adesuwa looked around the apartment briefly. She remembered when they first moved into that place 8 months ago. They were both excited. They ate noodles on the floor because they had no dining table yet. They laughed together while arranging second-hand furniture. Now another woman stood there like the owner of the house. Adesuwa's breathing became shaky. Kelvin, she whispered. I'm carrying your son. Kelvin finally looked at her directly. Then he said the words that destroyed her completely. That doesn't change anything. For a moment, even the sound of the rain disappeared from Adesuwa's ears. Everything around her suddenly felt distant. She looked at Kelvin like she no longer recognized him. Vanessa crossed her arms confidently. You heard him. Adesuwa slowly bent down and picked up her small bag from the floor. Her hands trembled badly. She looked at Kelvin one last time, hoping maybe she would still see a little mercy inside him. But his face remained cold. The man she loved was gone. Completely gone. As she turned slowly toward the staircase, Kelvin suddenly spoke again. And don't come back here. Adesuwa stopped walking. His next words hit even harder. I sent somebody to bring the rest of your things later. Not our things. Your things. The final separation had happened. Adesuwa walked down the staircase slowly while tears mixed with rainwater across her face. Behind her, the apartment door closed loudly. Then the music continued again. As if she never existed there. Outside the building, the security guard looked at her sympathetically but said nothing. Lagos was full of painful stories. People learned not to interfere. Cars passed on the wet road. Street lights reflected across puddles of dirty water. Adesuwa walked slowly without direction. Her stomach hurt slightly now. She placed one hand there immediately. It's okay, she whispered softly to her unborn child. Mommy is here. But honestly, she was scared. Very scared. She had nowhere to go. Her parents were both dead. Her only aunt lived in a small village far away in Edo State. Most of her friends stopped calling after Kelvin became rich and started moving with wealthy people. The truth was simple. She was alone. Completely alone. The rain continued heavily while she walked beside the empty road carrying her small bag. Her slippers nearly broke from the water. Her body felt weak from stress and pregnancy. Suddenly bright headlights stopped near her. A black car rolled down its window slowly. 2 young men inside stared at her. One of them smiled suspiciously. Fine girl, where are you going this night? Adesuwa ignored them immediately and kept walking faster. The car moved slowly beside her. You need help. The second man laughed. Or maybe your boyfriend chased you out. Fear entered her chest immediately. She tightened her grip on her bag and walked faster despite the pain in her legs. Luckily another vehicle approached from behind, causing the men to drive away quickly. Adesuwa stopped briefly and breathed heavily. Her eyes filled with fresh tears again. Lagos at night was dangerous enough for ordinary women. For a pregnant woman alone in the rain, it was even worse. After walking for almost 30 minutes, she finally reached a small roadside food store that was still open. An elderly woman stood there arranging plastic chairs. The woman looked surprised immediately after seeing Adesuwa's condition. My daughter, what happened to you? Adesuwa tried speaking calmly. Please, can I sit for a while? Of course. The woman quickly brought out a small chair. Adesuwa sat down carefully while rubbing her stomach again. The old woman handed her a towel. You're freezing. Thank you. The woman studied her quietly. You shouldn't be outside in this condition. At those words, Adesuwa finally broke down completely. She covered her face and cried silently. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just deep painful crying from somebody whose entire world had collapsed in one night. The old woman sat beside her quietly. Sometimes silence comforted better than words. After several minutes, the woman spoke gently. Did your husband do this? Adesuwa nodded slowly. The woman sighed heavily. Men. Adesuwa wiped her eyes weakly. He changed. The woman looked at her carefully. No. Money only revealed who he already was. Those words stayed inside Adesuwa's mind immediately. At that exact moment, far away inside the luxury apartment, Kelvin laughed loudly again while pouring himself another drink. But deep inside him, something was already beginning to crack. He just did not know it yet. Morning came slowly over Lagos. The rain had stopped, but the city still looked wet and tired. Dirty water gathered near broken gutters while buses splashed through the roads carelessly. Street hawkers shouted loudly as workers rushed toward their offices. The usual noise of Lagos returned again, as if nothing painful had happened the previous night. But for Adesuwa, everything had changed. She sat quietly inside the small roadside food store where the elderly woman had allowed her to rest. Her wet clothes from the night before were now drying slowly under the weak morning breeze. A cup of hot tea rested untouched in front of her. Her eyes looked swollen from crying. The old woman, whose name was Mama Busy, watched her carefully while preparing beans and bread for early customers. You should eat something, Mama Busy said gently. Adesuwa forced a small nod. I'm trying. But the truth was that her stomach felt tight with worry. Every time she remembered Kelvin's face, the pain returned fresh again. Mama Busy sat across from her. Do you have any family nearby? Adesuwa looked down at her hands. No. No parents. They passed away years ago. What about brothers or sisters? She shook her head slowly. Mama Busy sighed heavily. For a moment both women remained silent while customers entered and left the food store. Some people glanced curiously at Adesuwa's swollen stomach and tired face, but nobody asked questions. Lagos people were used to seeing suffering. Sometimes too used to it. Mama Busy finally spoke again. You can stay here till evening. But my store closes at night. Adesuwa nodded quickly. Thank you, Mama. Have you tried calling your husband again? At that question, Adesuwa slowly reached for her phone inside her bag. Dead battery. She had no charger with her. No money either. The reality hit her hard again. Everything she owned was still inside Kelvin's apartment. Her clothes. Her documents. Her small savings. Even the baby items she had started buying little by little. All gone. Adesuwa swallowed painfully. Then suddenly she remembered something. Her online clothing business account. She quickly searched inside her bag and found a small notebook containing customer payment records. Maybe she still had some money left inside her bank account. Hope entered her chest slightly. Mama Busy, is there any charging point here? The woman pointed toward a small extension box near the wall. There. Adesuwa plugged in her phone immediately. As the battery slowly came alive, fear returned again. She knew there would probably be messages from Kelvin. Or maybe nothing at all. Both possibilities scared her. The phone finally switched on. Immediately several notifications entered at once. Missed calls. Social media messages. Bank alerts. But no message from Kelvin. Not one. Adesuwa stared at the screen quietly. That hurt more than insults. Because it meant he was completely comfortable without her already. Then another message entered suddenly. From Vanessa. Adesuwa's chest tightened immediately before opening it. The message contained only one sentence. Please stop disturbing Kelvin and move on with your life. Adesuwa froze. Disturbing him. After everything they shared together. Her fingers trembled badly. Mama Busy noticed immediately. What happened? Adesuwa slowly locked the phone screen again. Nothing. But her eyes filled with tears once more. Across town, Kelvin woke up late inside the apartment. Empty bottles and glasses covered the sitting room. The party guests had already left hours earlier. Vanessa walked out of the bedroom wearing one of Kelvin's shirts casually. "You're awake?" Kelvin rubbed his forehead tiredly. His head hurt badly from alcohol. "What time is it?" "Almost 10. Vanessa sat beside him comfortably. "You have that meeting with Chief Adewale by noon." Kelvin nodded absent-mindedly. But strangely, his mind kept drifting back toward the previous night. Toward Adesuwa standing in the rain. For a brief second, guilt touched him again. But Vanessa quickly interrupted his thoughts. "You did the right thing." Kelvin looked at her. "She'll survive." He stayed quiet. Vanessa leaned closer. "You can't keep carrying poor people's problems forever." Kelvin forced himself to nod. This was the life he wanted now. Luxury. Connections. Power. Not struggling every day beside a woman who reminded him of his poor past. At least that was what he kept telling himself. Back at the food store, Adesuwa finally checked her bank account. The balance nearly made her cry again. 38,000 naira. That was all she had left. And with a baby coming soon, the money meant almost nothing. She quickly checked her online clothing page. Several customers had already been asking why delivery stopped recently. Business had slowed badly during the last few months because Kelvin kept pressuring her to stop acting like a local market woman. At first he claimed he wanted her to rest during pregnancy. Later she realized the truth. He was ashamed of her hustle. Mama Busy watched quietly as Adesuwa wiped another tear. "You're educated, ABI?" "Yes." "What did you study?" "Mass communication." Mama Busy nodded slowly. "You will survive?" Adesuwa smiled weakly without confidence. Before she could answer, her phone suddenly rang. Kelvin. Her heart skipped immediately. For a second she almost ignored it. But finally she answered softly. "Hello." Kelvin's voice sounded cold and businesslike. "Where are you?" Adesuwa felt pain rise again immediately. Not "how are you?" Not "are you safe?" Just "where are you?" "I'm fine," she answered quietly. "I asked where you are." "Why?" A short silence followed. Then Kelvin spoke again. "My driver will bring your remaining things later today." Adesuwa closed her eyes briefly. The way he spoke sounded like she was a stranger already. "What time?" "Afternoon." Another silence entered between them. So many words remained trapped inside her chest. Questions. Pain. Disbelief. But none of them mattered anymore. Then Kelvin suddenly spoke again, this time softer. "You should stay with somebody for now." Adesuwa almost laughed bitterly. Somebody. Who exactly? The woman he abandoned had nobody left. But she refused to beg him again. "I'll be fine." Kelvin hesitated briefly. Then Vanessa's voice sounded faintly from his side. "Baby, come and eat first." Adesuwa froze instantly. Kelvin lowered his voice. "I have to go." The call ended immediately. Adesuwa stared at the phone screen for several seconds before lowering it slowly. Mama Busy looked angry. "He's with another woman already." Adesuwa nodded silently. Mama Busy hissed loudly. "Men can be wicked." Adesuwa finally spoke the painful truth she had been avoiding. "I think he stopped loving me long ago." Mama Busy shook her head. "No. A man who truly loves you doesn't throw you away when life becomes comfortable." Those words stayed heavy inside Adesuwa's chest. Hours passed slowly. The sun grew hotter outside while Lagos traffic became worse. Customers continued coming and going. Some bought food. Some argued loudly. Some laughed carelessly. Meanwhile Adesuwa sat quietly wondering where her life would go next. Around 2 in the afternoon, a black SUV finally stopped near the food store. Kelvin's driver stepped out carrying 2 large bags. The driver looked uncomfortable immediately after seeing Adesuwa's condition. "Madam." Adesuwa stood slowly. "Thank you." The man avoided eye contact. "Oga said I should give you this too." He handed her an envelope. After he left, Adesuwa opened it carefully. Inside was money. 500,000 naira. For a second she simply stared at it. Then suddenly anger rose inside her chest. After 5 years together. after carrying his child. This was how Kelvin planned to erase her from his life. With money. Mama Busy looked shocked. That's a lot. But Adesuwa felt no happiness. Only humiliation. Because deep down she understood something painful. Kelvin believed money could replace loyalty. Could replace sacrifice. Could replace love. And that realization wounded her deeply. Inside one of the bags, she found her clothes folded carelessly. Some were missing. Then she noticed something else. Their wedding photo frame was broken inside the bag. The glass had shattered completely across both their smiling faces. Adesuwa slowly picked it up. Her hands trembled badly again. That photo was taken during their small wedding ceremony in Suralaya. They had almost nothing then. But they looked happy. Truly happy. Mama Busy noticed the broken frame. Sorry, my daughter. Adesuwa stared at the cracked photo silently. Then finally she whispered something quietly to herself. The man in this picture no longer exists. That evening, Mama Busy helped her arrange the bags properly. You can't stay here forever, the old woman said gently. I know. Maybe you should go back to your village temporarily. Adesuwa shook her head immediately. No. She refused to return home as a rejected pregnant woman. The gossip alone would destroy her. And honestly, a part of her still hoped Kelvin might change his mind somehow. Even though deep inside she already knew the truth. Night slowly approached again. Fear entered Adesuwa's chest once more. Where would she sleep? How would she survive? As she sat quietly thinking about her next move, sudden pain shot through her lower stomach. Sharp. Unexpected. Adesuwa gasped immediately and held the table tightly. Mama Busy stood up quickly. What happened? My stomach. Another sharp pain entered. Sweat formed across Adesuwa's forehead immediately. Mama Busy's face changed with fear. You need hospital. Adesuwa shook her head quickly. No money. Forget money first. Another painful cramp hit harder this time. Adesuwa bent forward, breathing heavily now. Fear spread across her entire body. Not the baby. Please, not the baby. Mama Busy quickly rushed outside searching for help while Adesuwa struggled to breathe properly inside the store. Her vision slowly became blurry. The voices around her started sounding distant. Then suddenly everything went dark. The voices around Adesuwa sounded far away. Very far away. She could hear people shouting, but their words felt mixed together inside her fading mind. Her body felt heavy. Her stomach hurt badly. Fear gripped her chest as darkness slowly swallowed everything around her. Then she heard Mama Busy's voice screaming. Help her. Somebody help. Footsteps rushed around the small food store. Plastic chairs moved loudly. Somebody touched Adesuwa's shoulder gently. My daughter. Can you hear me? Adesuwa tried opening her eyes, but her strength was disappearing quickly. Another painful cramp hit her stomach. She cried weakly. My baby. Don't talk, the unfamiliar woman's voice replied calmly. You will be fine. Moments later, strong arms helped lift Adesuwa carefully into a vehicle parked nearby. The smell inside the car felt clean and comforting. Cool air touched her wet skin while the engine started immediately. Mama Busy entered beside her. Please save her, the old woman begged emotionally. The unfamiliar woman answered firmly. She will not die. The car sped into Lagos traffic. Adesuwa drifted in and out of consciousness while holding her stomach tightly. She heard horns blaring outside. She heard the driver shouting angrily at other vehicles blocking the road. Then the woman beside her spoke softly again. Stay awake for me. Adesuwa forced her eyes open slightly. For the first time she saw the woman clearly. Dark skin. Kind eyes. Grey head wrap. Strong presence. The woman looked around 60 years old. Good, she said softly. Don't sleep yet. Adesuwa's lips trembled weakly. My baby. Your baby is fighting. So you too must fight. Tears rolled down Adesuwa's face immediately. She did not even know this woman. Yet her voice carried more care than Kelvin had shown in months. The car finally stopped outside a private hospital. Nurses rushed out immediately with a wheelchair. Within minutes, Adesuwa was pushed through bright hospital hallways while doctors asked questions rapidly. How many months pregnant? Any bleeding? Has she eaten today? Mama Busy tried answering as best as she could. The older woman who brought Adesuwa there remained calm throughout everything. Do whatever is needed, she told the doctor's family. I will handle the bills. Inside the examination room, doctors worked quickly while Adesuwa struggled through pain and fear. After several tense minutes, one doctor finally looked relieved. She's under serious stress and exhaustion, he explained. But thankfully the baby is still stable. Adesuwa closed her eyes immediately in relief. Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. Olo had protected her child. A nurse adjusted her blanket carefully. You need complete rest. For the first time since Kelvin threw her out, Adesuwa finally felt safe enough to breathe properly again. Hours later, the hospital room became quiet. Mama Busy had already gone home after promising to visit again later. The older woman remained seated beside Adesuwa's bed calmly reading messages on her phone. Adesuwa looked at her weakly. Thank you. The woman smiled warmly. You already thanked me before. I don't even know your name. My name is Efua Mensah. Ghanaian. Mama Efua laughed softly. Yes. From Accra. Adesuwa nodded slowly. You saved me. Mama Efua shook her head. Olo saved you. I only happened to be there. Silence settled briefly between them. Then Mama Efua studied her carefully. How old are you? 28. And your husband really sent you away in this condition? Adesuwa looked down painfully. Yes. Mama Efua sighed deeply. That single sound carried disappointment and anger together. Adesuwa swallowed hard. He wasn't always like this. Most people are kind when life is hard, Mama Efua replied calmly. Real character shows when comfort arrives. Those words entered deeply into Adesuwa's heart. Mama Efua adjusted her glasses before speaking again. I lost my husband many years ago. Adesuwa looked at her quietly. I raised 3 children alone. Life dealt with me badly too. Something about the woman's voice felt honest and comforting. Not pity. Strength. Mama Efua continued. I know pain when I see it. And I know survival too. Adesuwa's eyes became emotional again. I don't know where to start from anymore. Mama Efua leaned slightly closer. You start by staying alive. The simple answer stayed inside Adesuwa's chest quietly. Not long after, her phone vibrated beside the hospital bed. Kelvin. Immediately tension returned to her body. Mama Efua noticed. You don't have to answer. But after several rings, Adesuwa finally picked up. Hello. Kelvin sounded impatient. Where are you? Adesuwa almost laughed bitterly again. Still no concern in his voice. Only control. I'm in the hospital. A short silence followed immediately. What happened? I collapsed. Kelvin exhaled sharply. Is the baby okay? The question hurt her unexpectedly. Not because he asked, but because it sounded more like obligation than love. Yes. Another silence. Then Kelvin spoke carefully. I'll send money if needed. Adesuwa closed her eyes briefly. Again with money. Always money. No need. Adesuwa. For the first time, his voice carried slight discomfort. Maybe guilt. Maybe fear. But it came too late. She spoke calmly. I'm tired, Kelvin. Before he could answer, she ended the call. Her hands trembled afterward. Mama Efua watched quietly. He still controls your emotions strongly. Adesuwa nodded weakly. I loved him. Mama Efua's face softened slightly. That is why betrayal hurts deeply. It comes from somebody who once felt like home. Those words nearly made Adesuwa cry again. The hospital room became silent once more. Outside the window, evening darkness slowly covered Lagos. Cars moved endlessly below. Somewhere in the city, Kelvin continued living comfortably inside his expensive apartment. Meanwhile, the woman who once helped build his dreams lay inside a hospital bed fighting emotional pain alone. But destiny was already moving quietly. Neither of them understood it yet. The next morning, Mama Efua returned early carrying food and fresh clothes for Adesuwa. You need proper food now. Adesuwa looked shocked. You bought all this for me. Mama Efua smiled. You're too surprised by kindness. That statement hit Adesuwa quietly. Maybe because pain had made kindness feel unusual. As she ate slowly, Mama Efua sat nearby making phone calls in both English and Twi. From the conversation, Adesuwa realized the woman owned some kind of business in Ghana. After ending one call, Mama Efua looked directly at her. What work can you do? Adesuwa wiped her hands carefully. I used to run a small online clothing business. Only that. I studied mass communication too. Mama Efua nodded thoughtfully. Can you work hard? Adesuwa answered immediately. Yes. Even when life becomes unfair. Her answer came slower this time. Yes. Mama Efua leaned back slightly. Good. Adesuwa hesitated briefly before asking quietly. Why are you helping me? Mama Efua smiled softly. Years ago somebody helped me when I had nothing to. She looked out the hospital window for a moment before continuing. If they ignored me that day, my children would have suffered terribly. Then she looked back at Adesuwa. Sometimes Allah sends strangers to continue blessings. Those words filled the room with silence. A peaceful silence. For the first time since being thrown into the rain, hope flickered weakly inside Adesuwa's chest again. Small. Fragile. But alive. 3 days later, Adesuwa was discharged from the hospital. The doctor warned her repeatedly to avoid stress, but stress had already become part of her life. Even breathing felt stressful now because every new morning reminded her that the life she once trusted was gone forever. Outside the hospital entrance, Lagos traffic moved noisily as usual. Danfo buses overloaded with passengers sped past carelessly while street hawkers shouted prices under the hot afternoon sun. Adesuwa stood quietly beside Mama Efua's car holding her small bags. For the first time in many days, she looked clean and rested properly. But deep inside, fear still followed her everywhere. What will you do now? Mama Efua asked gently. Adesuwa looked down. I honestly don't know. Mama Efua studied her silently for a few seconds before speaking again. Come with me to Ghana. Adesuwa looked up immediately. What? Come to Accra for now. At least until you recover properly. The offer shocked her completely. You don't even know me. Mama Efua smiled calmly. I know enough. Adesuwa became emotional immediately. But why would you carry my problems like this? Mama Efua opened the car door slowly. Because someday you may carry somebody else's problems too. Those words settled deeply inside Adesuwa's heart. For a moment she looked around Lagos again. This city held too many painful memories already. Every road reminded her of Calvin. Every corner carried pieces of the life they once shared. Maybe living temporarily was exactly what she needed. Still, fear remained. What if I become a burden? Mama Efua laughed softly. You think too much. Adesuwa hesitated again. Then suddenly her phone vibrated. Kelvin. Her chest tightened immediately. Mama Efua noticed the fear in her eyes. You don't owe anybody access to your peace. Adesuwa slowly declined the call. For the first time since everything happened, she did not feel guilty for doing it. 2 days later, they traveled to Ghana by road. The journey felt long and exhausting, but it also felt strangely peaceful. Mama Efua talked often during the trip while Adesuwa listened quietly beside her. Sometimes they discussed food. Sometimes business. Sometimes life. Little by little, Adesuwa relaxed around her. By the time they entered Accra, evening lights already covered the city beautifully. Adesuwa stared through the car window quietly. Everything looked different from Lagos. Cleaner roads. Calmer movement. Cooler atmosphere. Mama Efua pointed her head proudly. Welcome to Ghana. For the first time in weeks, Adesuwa smiled genuinely. Mama Efua's home stood inside a peaceful neighborhood surrounded by flowers and tall mango trees. The house itself was not extremely luxurious, but it looked warm and comfortable. As they entered, a younger woman rushed forward smiling brightly. Mama, you're back. Then she noticed Adesuwa immediately. Oh. Mama Efua removed her shoes calmly. This is Adesuwa. She'll stay with us for some time. The younger woman smiled warmly. You're welcome. Her name was Abina, one of Mama Efua's daughters. Unlike Vanessa, whose beauty felt cold and proud, Abina carried warmth naturally. She immediately helped Adesuwa with her bags and showed her around the house comfortably. That night, they all ate together at the dining table. Simple food. Simple conversation. Yet Adesuwa nearly cried quietly during dinner because she could not remember the last time she felt genuine peace around people. No insults. No tension. No pretending. Just kindness. Later that night, while lying inside the guest room, Adesuwa placed both hands gently on her stomach. "We survived," she whispered softly to her unborn child. Tears rolled down her face again. But this time, they were not only tears of pain. Somewhere deep inside her, hope was slowly beginning to return. Weeks passed gradually. Mama Efua owned a catering and events business that supplied food for weddings, conferences, and parties across Accra. The business kept everybody busy almost every day. Despite her pregnancy, Adesuwa refused to sit idle. She helped with bookkeeping, social media pages, customer calls, online promotions. Very quickly, Mama Efua noticed how intelligent and organized she was. One afternoon while reviewing customer orders, Mama Efua shook her head in surprise. "You understand business very well." Adesuwa smiled faintly. "I learned from surviving." Mama Efua looked at her proudly. "Pain trained you?" That statement stayed in Adesuwa's mind for hours. Because it was true. Everything she suffered in Lagos had forced her to become stronger quietly. Meanwhile, Kelvin's life in Nigeria continued moving forward outwardly. But internally, cracks were slowly appearing. One evening he sat inside a high-class lounge with business associates while Vanessa laughed beside him. Expensive drinks filled the table. Yet Kelvin barely paid attention. His mind drifted constantly. Toward Adesuwa. Toward the baby. Toward the night he threw her into the rain. He tried ignoring the guilt by focusing on money and success, but some nights became difficult. Especially after he returned home. Because despite the expensive apartment, something now felt empty there. Vanessa noticed his silence more often lately. "You've been acting strange." Kelvin forced a smile. "I am fine." "No, you're distracted." Kelvin drank quietly without answering. Vanessa leaned closer. "You're not thinking about her again, are you?" Kelvin immediately frowned. "Can we not discuss this?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "She's gone already. Move on." But Kelvin no longer answered confidently like before. Because deep down, he was beginning to realize something dangerous. Peace did not automatically follow money. Back in Ghana, Adesuwa's pregnancy advanced steadily. One morning, while helping arrange event decorations, sudden pain hit her lower back strongly. Mama Efua noticed immediately. "You need hospital now." Several hours later, doctors confirmed labor had started earlier than expected. Fear entered Adesuwa immediately. Her hands shook badly as nurses prepared her for delivery. Mama Efua held her hand tightly. "You are strong." Adesuwa cried softly. "I'm scared." "You will survive this." The labor became difficult quickly. Very difficult. Hours passed painfully. Sweat covered Adesuwa's body while doctors moved urgently around the room. At one point, machines began making fast warning sounds. Nurses rushed closer immediately. Mama Efua stood outside praying silently with tears in her eyes. Inside the delivery room, Adesuwa screamed from pain and exhaustion. Then suddenly everything became dangerously quiet. One doctor spoke urgently. "Push again." Adesuwa gathered the last strength left inside her body. And finally, a baby cried loudly. The sound filled the room instantly. Strong. Alive. Powerful. Tears rushed down Adesuwa's face immediately. Her baby survived. Minutes later, a nurse placed the small baby boy carefully into her arms. The child looked tiny and fragile beneath the hospital lights. But when Adesuwa held him close, something inside her changed forever. All the pain. All the rejection. All the fear. None of it mattered in that moment. Because now she had somebody depending completely on her. She kissed his forehead gently while crying softly. "My son." Mama Efua entered moments later with tears in her own eyes too. "He's beautiful." Adesuwa smiled weakly. "I want to name him Jason." Mama Efua nodded proudly. Jason. The first year after Jason's birth was the hardest period of Adesuwa's life. Many nights, she barely slept. Jason cried often because of stomach pain, and each time he woke up screaming in the middle of the night, Adesuwa immediately carried him close against her chest while walking slowly around the room. Sometimes she sang softly to calm him. Sometimes she cried quietly with him. Not because she regretted having him. Never. But because exhaustion was slowly eating her strength away. Motherhood was beautiful, but it was also heavy when a woman carried everything alone. One rainy evening, Jason developed a high fever. His tiny body burned with heat while he cried weakly in her arms. Fear immediately entered Adesuwa's chest again. Mama Efua, she called shakily. Within minutes, both women rushed him to the hospital. Adesuwa sat nervously beside the hospital bed while doctors treated him. Her hands would not stop trembling. What if something happens to him? Mama Efua placed a calm hand on her shoulder. Nothing will happen. But Adesuwa could not relax. Jason was all she had now. Her entire world existed inside that small child. Hours later, the fever finally reduced. The doctor smiled reassuringly. He'll be fine. Adesuwa nearly collapsed from relief. That night, while carrying Jason home, she looked down at his sleeping face and whispered softly. You and I will survive everything together. As months passed, life slowly became more stable. Not easy, but manageable. Mama Efua allowed Adesuwa to work fully in the catering business after recovering properly from childbirth. At first, Adesuwa handled only small responsibilities. Customer records, phone calls, online promotion. But very quickly, the business began growing faster because of her ideas. She redesigned their social media pages, improved customer communication, created online advertisements. Within 6 months, Mama Efua's catering company started receiving more bookings than ever before. One afternoon, Abina looked shocked while checking sales numbers. Since Adesuwa joined us, business doubled. Mama Efua smiled proudly. I told you she was special. Adesuwa laughed shyly. I'm only trying my best. But secretly, something was changing inside her. Confidence. The same woman who once cried helplessly in the rain was slowly rebuilding herself piece by piece. Still, emotional wounds remained. Especially at night. Sometimes after everybody slept, Adesuwa sat quietly beside Jason's crib staring into darkness while painful memories returned. Kelvin's voice. His betrayal. The apartment door closing against her face. Those memories still hurt deeply. One particular night, she finally gathered courage to open her old photo gallery again. Pictures of her and Kelvin filled the screen. Smiling together at the beach. Eating street food. Laughing inside their first tiny apartment. For several minutes, Adesuwa simply stared silently. Then she noticed something painful. Most of their happiest photos were taken during their poorest days. Before money changed him. Tears filled her eyes slowly. Mama Efua entered quietly and noticed immediately. You're thinking about him again. Adesuwa wiped her face quickly. I thought I was stronger now. Mama Efua sat beside her calmly. He was your husband. Healing takes time. Adesuwa looked down at her phone again. I keep asking myself what I did wrong. Mama Efua's expression became serious immediately. Listen carefully to me. Adesuwa looked up. A woman must never blame herself for another person's wickedness. Those words entered deeply into her heart. Mama Efua continued softly. You loved honestly. You sacrificed honestly. His betrayal belongs to him, not you. Silence filled the room afterward. But this time, the silence felt healing. The next morning, Adesuwa woke up earlier than usual. Something inside her mind felt different. Clearer. For the first time since her marriage collapsed, she stopped viewing herself as a victim completely. She was still standing. Still breathing. Still fighting. And maybe that itself meant something powerful. Months later, Mama Efua received a major catering contract for an international business conference in Accra. The event was huge. Foreign investors. Government officials. Business executives. Everybody inside the company became busy preparing. Adesuwa handled online publicity and branding for the event tirelessly. She barely slept during that period. One afternoon, while reviewing banner designs on her laptop, a middle-aged man stopped behind her. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with quiet authority. You designed this campaign? Adesuwa looked up politely. Yes, sir. The man studied the work carefully. This is impressive. Thank you. You understand branding very well. Adesuwa smiled slightly. I'm still learning. The man laughed softly. You already know more than many professionals. His name was Mr. Mensah, one of Ghana's respected business investors. Throughout the event, he continued observing Adesuwa quietly. Not because of beauty. Because of intelligence. She solved problems quickly. Handled customers calmly. Worked without complaining. At the end of the conference, he approached her again. Have you ever considered marketing consultancy? Adesuwa looked surprised. No. You should. That simple conversation stayed inside her mind long after the event ended. A week later, Mr. Mensah invited her to help improve online branding for one of his small businesses. The pay was good. Very good. Adesuwa hesitated initially because of Jason. But Mama Efua encouraged her immediately. This is opportunity. So she accepted. The work started small at first. Simple online campaigns. Social media management. Customer engagement. But within months, the business sales increased heavily. Mr. Mensah became impressed. Then he referred her to another company. Then another. Soon, Adesuwa found herself handling branding projects for multiple businesses across Accra. For the first time in years, real money started entering her account consistently. One evening, while calculating her earnings quietly inside her room, she suddenly froze. Tears slowly filled her eyes again. Not from pain this time. From disbelief. Because after everything she survived, life was finally changing. Little by little. Slowly but surely. Meanwhile in Lagos, Kelvin's life no longer looked as perfect as before. His business partnerships had started failing quietly. Several investments collapsed after one major client withdrew unexpectedly. Debt slowly increased. Pressure increased too. Vanessa became colder every week. One night inside the apartment, she threw a document angrily onto the table. You said this contract was guaranteed. Kelvin rubbed his forehead tiredly. The market situation changed. Vanessa scoffed loudly. You always have excuses lately. Kelvin's temper flared immediately. I'm handling it. Vanessa folded her arms. Maybe you're not as smart as I thought. Those words hit Kelvin harder than expected. Because deep inside, fear was already growing. For the first time in years, he felt unstable again. And during those sleepless nights, one memory kept returning repeatedly. Adesuwa. The woman who stood beside him when he had absolutely nothing. The woman he threw away. One evening, while sitting alone inside the dark apartment, Kelvin opened an old drawer searching for documents. Then suddenly he found a small photograph hidden underneath papers. Adesuwa smiling beside him years ago. Pregnant. Happy. Hopeful. 2 years passed. Then 3. Then 5. Life changed slowly in ways nobody could have imagined. The frightened pregnant woman who once sat helplessly inside Mama Busy's roadside food store no longer existed. Adesuwa Daniels had transformed completely. Not overnight. Not magically. But through years of discipline, sacrifice, sleepless nights, and painful lessons. Her marketing consultancy business had grown beyond Ghana. Companies from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa now contacted her regularly for branding and digital campaigns. She hired employees. Opened an office. Traveled for meetings. Magazine interviews started coming. Business podcasts invited her. Women admired her story without even knowing the full truth behind it. But despite all the success, one thing never changed. Her love for Jason. Every morning before work, she personally prepared his breakfast. Every night, no matter how exhausted she felt, she read stories with him before bed. Jason was now 5 years old. Bright. Curious. Funny. And every time he smiled, Adesuwa felt strength return to her body again. One Saturday morning, Jason sat on the kitchen counter eating bread while watching her prepare tea. Mommy. Yes. Why don't I have a daddy in the house like Kofi's family? The knife in Adesuwa's hand paused briefly. Questions like this had started recently. She knew this day would eventually come. She turned calmly toward him. You have a father. Where is he? Adesuwa forced a small smile. He lives far away. Jason thought quietly for a moment. Does he know me? That question hit deeply. Very deeply. But she remained calm. Yes. Then why doesn't he visit? Adesuwa walked closer and kissed his forehead gently. Sometimes adults make mistakes they later regret. Jason accepted the answer innocently and continued eating. But after dropping him at school later that morning, Adesuwa sat inside her car quietly for several minutes. Her chest felt heavy again. Because despite everything Kelvin did, she never wanted Jason to grow up feeling unwanted. Back in Lagos, Kelvin Obi barely resembled the confident man he once was. His expensive lifestyle had started collapsing publicly. Several business deals failed. Debt piled up heavily. Luxury friends disappeared one by one. The same people who once praised him now avoided his calls. Vanessa had become constantly angry and bitter. One evening inside the apartment, she exploded during an argument. "I'm tired of this." Kelvin looked exhausted already. "Can you lower your voice?" "No. You promised me a better life." Kelvin laughed bitterly. "And you promised to stay." Vanessa grabbed the handbag angrily. "You became useless." The word entered Kelvin's chest like a knife. Useless. Years ago, he once used similar words against Adesuwa. Now life had brought them back to him. Vanessa walked toward the door furiously. "I can't continue suffering because of your failures." Then she left. Just like that. Kelvin stood frozen inside the silent apartment after the door slammed shut. The same apartment where he once threw away the woman who truly loved him. Now he finally understood something painful. People who love only success never stay during failure. That night, Kelvin drank alone until morning. For the first time in years, he admitted the truth to himself completely. He missed Adesuwa. Not because she became successful. Not because Vanessa left. But because deep down, he finally understood what genuine loyalty looked like. And he destroyed it with his own hands. Meanwhile in Ghana, Adesuwa received a major invitation that would change everything again. A large business conference in Lagos wanted her as one of the keynote speakers. When she first saw the email, her heart stopped briefly. Lagos. The city she had avoided for 5 years. Memories rushed back immediately. The rain. The betrayal. The pain. Mama Efua noticed her silence during dinner. What happened? Adesuwa handed her the phone quietly. Mama Efua read the email carefully. "This is big." "I know. You don't sound happy." Adesuwa looked down. "It's in Lagos." Mama Efua became quiet briefly. Then she nodded slowly with understanding. "You're afraid." Adesuwa sighed deeply. "I don't want old wounds opening again." Mama Efua reached across the table and held her hand gently. "My daughter, healing is not avoiding places. Healing is returning stronger." Those words stayed inside Adesuwa's mind the entire night. Days later, she accepted the invitation. The conference organizers booked luxury accommodation and first-class travel for her team. Everything felt surreal sometimes. Especially when she remembered how life once looked. On the morning of the trip, Jason became excited immediately after seeing the airport. "Mommy. Look at the planes." Adesuwa smiled warmly. "You like airplanes that much?" "I want to fly one someday." She laughed softly. "Then you'll become a pilot." Jason grinned proudly. As they boarded the plane together, Adesuwa looked out the window silently while emotions mixed inside her chest. 5 years ago she left Lagos broken. Now she was returning as a respected businesswoman. Life truly changed unexpectedly. When their plane landed, the Lagos air hit differently. The same noisy city. The same traffic. The same restless energy. But Adesuwa herself was no longer the same woman. A luxury black convoy waited outside the airport for her. Conference organizers welcomed her warmly while cameras flashed around them. Jason looked amazed by everything. "Mommy, are you famous?" Adesuwa laughed softly. "No, baby." But secretly, she still struggled to believe her own transformation sometimes. Meanwhile, across Lagos, Kelvin sat inside a small office desperately trying to convince investors to support his struggling business. Nobody looked interested. After another failed meeting, he walked out frustrated and exhausted. His phone battery was low. His account balance nearly empty. Pressure surrounded him completely. As he entered his car, his old friend Chinedu suddenly called him. "Guy, where are you?" "Why?" "There's one major business conference happening at Eco Hotel today. Big investors are attending. Maybe you can network there." Kelvin hesitated. "I wasn't invited." So what? Just go. Desperation pushed him finally. He needed opportunities badly. An hour later, Kelvin entered the massive conference venue wearing his last expensive suit. The hall looked beautiful. Powerful business leaders filled the room while photographers moved around capturing important guests. Kelvin adjusted his jacket nervously while searching for familiar faces. Then suddenly, movement near the entrance caught everyone's attention. People turned immediately. Security guards rushed forward respectfully. A sleek black convoy stopped outside the building entrance. Then a woman stepped out gracefully. Elegant black dress. Confident posture. Calm smile. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly. Kelvin froze. His breathing stopped. No. Impossible. But as the woman walked further into the hall beside a little boy, reality struck him hard. It was Adesuwa. The same woman he once threw into the rain. Now entering a room full of powerful people like somebody who truly belonged there. Kelvin's hands began shaking uncontrollably. And beside her walked a young boy who looked painfully familiar. For several seconds, Kelvin could not move. The conference hall suddenly felt too hot. Too loud. Too unreal. People surrounded Adesuwa immediately the moment she entered. Business executives shook her hand warmly while photographers snapped pictures non-stop. Somebody collected her handbag respectfully. Another person guided her toward the VIP section. She smiled calmly through everything, carrying herself with quiet confidence that Kelvin had never seen before. And beside her walked the little boy. Small black suit. Bright eyes. Curious smile. The child looked around the hall excitedly while holding Adesuwa's hand tightly. Kelvin's chest tightened painfully. Because the boy looked exactly like him. The same eyes. The same facial expression. Even the way he tilted his head while observing people looked familiar. Kelvin whispered weakly to himself. My son. A waiter nearly bumped into him, forcing him back into reality. Around him, people continued talking excitedly about Adesuwa. That's Adesuwa Daniels. She's brilliant. I heard her company works across 3 countries now. She built everything from scratch. Each sentence hit Kelvin harder. 5 years ago he believed she would struggle without him. Now she had become successful without needing him at all. Meanwhile, Adesuwa had not noticed him yet. She sat calmly near the front beside other invited speakers while Jason whispered questions beside her excitedly. Mommy, why are there so many cameras? She smiled softly. Because it's an important event. Will you talk on stage? Yes. Jason grinned proudly. My mommy is smart. Adesuwa laughed quietly and kissed his forehead. Watching them together from a distance broke something inside Kelvin completely. Because for the first time, he saw clearly what he lost. Not only a wife. A family. One of the organizers stepped onto the stage moments later. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of Africa's leading branding consultants, Miss Adesuwa Daniels. Applause filled the hall immediately. Kelvin felt frozen as Adesuwa stood gracefully and walked toward the stage. Confident. Elegant. Respected. Nothing about her looked broken anymore. She adjusted the microphone calmly before beginning her speech. And the moment she started talking, the entire room listened carefully. Her voice carried calm strength now. Not fear. Not weakness. She spoke about business growth, resilience, African entrepreneurship, and creating opportunities despite difficult beginnings. Every sentence sounded natural and powerful. Kelvin stared at her the entire time. Flashbacks kept attacking his mind. Adesuwa helping him write business proposals late at night. Adesuwa encouraging him when clients rejected him. Adesuwa believing in him before anybody else did. He remembered everything now. Things he ignored back then. At one point during the speech, Adesuwa said calmly, sometimes life forces you to rebuild from nothing. But difficult beginnings do not decide your final destination. The audience applauded loudly. Kelvin lowered his eyes immediately. Because deep down, he knew those words carried hidden pain. Pain connected to him. After the speech ended, people surrounded Adesuwa immediately again. Investors. Business owners. Journalists. Everyone wanted her attention. Kelvin stood far away struggling to breathe properly. His heart pounded heavily inside his chest. He needed to speak with her. Even if only once. Even if she rejected him. He slowly began walking toward her through the crowd. But before reaching her, Jason suddenly noticed him. The little boy stared curiously. Their eyes met. Kelvin froze instantly. Something about seeing his own eyes inside that child nearly destroyed him emotionally. Jason tugged gently at Adesuwa's hand. Mommy. Yes. That man keeps looking at us. Adesuwa turned casually. Then everything inside her body stopped. Kelvin. Standing right there. Older. More tired. Less confident. But still Kelvin. For a brief moment, the noise around the hall disappeared completely. Old memories crashed into her mind instantly. The rain. The rejection. The humiliation. Her breathing tightened slightly. Kelvin took one slow step closer. Adesuwa. Hearing him say her name again after 5 years felt strange. Very strange. Jason looked between both adults curiously. Mommy, who is he? Adesuwa stayed silent briefly. Then she answered calmly. Someone I used to know. The sentence hit Kelvin painfully. Used to know? Not husband. Not family. Just somebody from the past. Kelvin swallowed hard while staring at Jason again. How old is he? Adesuwa's expression remained controlled. 5. Kelvin nearly broke down immediately. 5 years. 5 entire years lost. He looked at Jason carefully again. The child stared back innocently without understanding anything. Kelvin's eyes slowly filled with tears. Adesuwa noticed immediately. And strangely, part of her felt emotional too. Because despite everything, seeing Kelvin look at his son for the first time carried painful weight. Jason spoke innocently again. Mommy, why is he crying? Adesuwa gently touched Jason's shoulder. Go sit over there for 1 minute, okay? Jason nodded obediently and walked toward the refreshment table nearby. The moment he left, silence entered between them heavily. Kelvin finally spoke again. He's mine. Not a question. A realization. Adesuwa answered quietly. Yes. Kelvin covered his mouth briefly while emotions overwhelmed him completely. My God. Tears escaped his eyes openly now. I have a son. People nearby started noticing the emotional tension between them. Adesuwa lowered her voice calmly. This isn't the place. But Kelvin looked desperate suddenly. Why didn't you tell me? That question changed her expression immediately. For the first time since seeing him again, real anger entered her eyes. Tell you, she repeated quietly. You abandoned us. Kelvin looked crushed instantly. I know. You threw me out while I carried him inside my body. I know. You never came looking for us. Kelvin struggled to answer. Because the truth was ugly. At first, pride stopped him. Later, shame did. Then life started collapsing around him too. But none of those excuses sounded good enough now. Especially while staring at the child he never held once. Kelvin spoke weakly. I thought you hated me. Adesuwa laughed softly without humor. I did. The honesty hit hard. Very hard. Kelvin lowered his head. I deserved that. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Jason returned carrying juice happily. Mommy, can we go now? Kelvin stared at him emotionally again. Jason looked so comfortable beside Adesuwa. So loved. So protected. Kelvin suddenly realized something else painful. Despite raising Jason alone, Adesuwa gave the boy happiness anyway. Without him. Without his money. Without his presence. The realization filled him with both admiration and shame. Jason looked curiously at Kelvin again. Do I know you? Kelvin's lips trembled slightly. Before he could answer, Adesuwa spoke calmly. No, baby. The words sounded gentle. But they cut deeply. Because they were true. Jason did not know him. Not as a father. Not as family. Just a stranger staring emotionally at him inside a crowded hall. One of the organizers approached suddenly. Madam Adesuwa, the investors are waiting for you upstairs. She nodded politely. Then she turned toward Jason. Come, baby. Jason grabbed her hand immediately. As they started walking away, Kelvin spoke desperately behind them. Adesuwa, please. She stopped briefly but did not turn around. I just want to talk. Several emotions crossed her face quietly. Pain. Memory. Conflict. Then finally she answered calmly. Tomorrow. Kelvin looked shocked. You'll meet me? Yes. Hope entered his chest immediately for the first time in years. She slowly turned toward him again. But her next words humbled him completely. Not because of you. Her eyes moved toward Jason. Because my son deserves peace. Then she walked away gracefully holding Jason's hand. Kelvin remained standing alone in the middle of the conference hall while people moved around him carelessly. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight of his actions. And for the first time in 5 years, he was finally afraid. Kelvin barely slept that night. Inside his apartment, he sat alone on the edge of his bed staring into darkness while memories attacked his mind endlessly. Jason's face. Adesuwa's calm voice. The disappointment inside her eyes. Everything replayed repeatedly. At around 3 in the morning, he stood up and walked slowly toward the kitchen for water. The apartment felt painfully quiet now. Years ago, he once wanted silence and freedom. Now both things felt empty. He opened the fridge and stared blankly at the almost empty shelves. Even the apartment itself no longer looked luxurious to him. It only looked lonely. Meanwhile, inside her hotel suite across the city, Adesuwa sat quietly beside Jason's bed watching him sleep peacefully. The conference organizers had booked one of the best suites in the building, but despite the comfort around her, her mind remained restless. Seeing Kelvin again had reopened wounds she believed were already healed. Jason turned slightly in his sleep. Adesuwa gently adjusted his blanket. Then she walked toward the large window overlooking Lagos. The city lights stretched endlessly outside. 5 years ago, she walked these same streets pregnant, rejected, and terrified. Now she had returned stronger. Yet somehow, the pain still existed underneath everything. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Kelvin. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Adesuwa stared at the message quietly before locking the screen again without replying. The next afternoon, Kelvin arrived early at the restaurant they agreed to meet. The place sat quietly beside the water in Victoria Island. Soft music played in the background while wealthy customers spoke quietly around polished tables. Kelvin looked nervous. Very nervous. He checked the entrance repeatedly while wiping sweat from his palms. Then finally, Adesuwa entered. Simple cream-colored dress. Minimal makeup. Calm expression. No flashy appearance. Yet everybody inside the restaurant still noticed her immediately. Confidence now followed her naturally. Jason was not with her. Kelvin stood up quickly. Thank you for coming. Adesuwa sat down calmly across from him. I don't have much time. Kelvin nodded awkwardly before sitting again. For several seconds, silence filled the table heavily. So many years. So much pain. Too many unfinished emotions. Finally Kelvin spoke quietly. You look good. Adesuwa answered calmly. Life moved on. The sentence carried quiet meaning. Kelvin swallowed hard. I deserve that. A waiter approached briefly, but Adesuwa declined food politely. I am fine. After the waiter left, Kelvin stared down at the table before speaking again. I don't even know where to start. Adesuwa's face remained unreadable. Start with the truth. Kelvin nodded slowly. Then finally, he looked directly at her. I was stupid. Adesuwa stayed silent. I let money change me. I became proud. I started feeling ashamed of the same woman who suffered beside me. His voice became weaker. You loved me when I had absolutely nothing. Adesuwa looked away briefly toward the water outside. Memories hurt less now. But they still hurt. Kelvin continued quietly. When Vanessa entered my life, everything became about status and appearances. I started chasing a lifestyle I wasn't even ready for. Adesuwa finally looked back at him. And for that lifestyle, you threw away your family. Kelvin lowered his eyes immediately. Yes. The honesty made the moment heavier. Not easier. Kelvin rubbed his hands together nervously. There's not one day I haven't regretted it. Adesuwa almost responded sharply. But then she stopped herself. Because strangely, his face already showed enough punishment. The confident man she once knew was gone. Life had humbled him deeply. Kelvin spoke again. When Vanessa left me, I finally understood something. Adesuwa remained quiet. She only loved comfort. The moment struggles returned, she disappeared. He laughed bitterly. And suddenly I remembered how you stayed beside me through every embarrassment. Adesuwa's expression tightened slightly. You remember too late. Kelvin nodded painfully. I know. Another silence entered. Then Kelvin finally asked the question he feared most. Does Jason know who I am? Adesuwa answered honestly. No. Kelvin closed his eyes briefly. The pain on his face looked genuine. Did you ever plan to tell him? Yes. Kelvin looked surprised. I never wanted him to grow up hating you, she explained calmly. Children deserve peace, even when adults fail them. Those words nearly broke him again. Because despite everything he did, Adesuwa still protected Jason's emotional future carefully. Kelvin stared at her quietly for several seconds. You became stronger. Adesuwa smiled faintly. I had no choice. Then her expression changed slightly. For years, I hated you. Kelvin nodded silently. I know. I kept asking myself why I wasn't enough. Kelvin looked shattered immediately. No, Adesuwa. You made me feel disposable. His eyes filled with tears again. I was blind. Adesuwa's voice remained calm, but emotional weight sat underneath every word. The night you threw me out, I truly believed my life was over. Kelvin could barely breathe comfortably anymore. He imagined her pregnant and alone in the rain again. And the image disgusted him now. How did you survive? He asked weakly. Adesuwa leaned back slowly. Olu sent good people into my life. Then she told him everything. Mama busy. The hospital. Mama Efua. Ghana. Jason's difficult birth. Building her business from nothing. Kelvin listened silently like a man hearing judgment. Every struggle she described increased his shame. Especially because he understood one painful truth clearly now. She survived despite him. Not because of him. When she finished speaking, Kelvin suddenly stood up. Then something unexpected happened. He slowly dropped to his knees beside the table. Several people inside the restaurant turned immediately. Adesuwa froze in shock. Kelvin looked up at her with tears running openly down his face. I'm sorry. His voice broke badly. I'm so sorry, Adesuwa. People nearby whispered quietly while watching. But Kelvin no longer cared about pride. Not anymore. I destroyed the best thing Olu ever gave me. Adesuwa's chest tightened emotionally. Because she never imagined seeing Kelvin like this. The same man who once looked down on her. Now broken completely before her. Kelvin continued crying softly. Please forgive me. The restaurant became painfully quiet around them. Adesuwa stared at him silently while old memories flooded her mind again. The love. The betrayal. The suffering. Everything mixed together heavily. Then finally she spoke quietly. Stand up, Kelvin. But he shook his head emotionally. Not until you forgive me. Adesuwa closed her eyes briefly. Tears threatened to form again, but she controlled herself carefully. When she opened her eyes again, her voice sounded calm. I forgave you a long time ago. Kelvin looked stunned. What? I had to forgive you to heal. His tears increased immediately. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. Those words hit deeply. Very deeply. Kelvin slowly stood again and sat back down weakly. His entire body looked drained. 2 days after the meeting at the restaurant, Kelvin sat nervously inside a quiet family cafe in Lagos waiting for Adesuwa and Jason. His hands would not stay still. Every few seconds he checked the entrance again. He had attended millionaire business meetings before without fear. He had spoken confidently before wealthy investors and powerful executives. But nothing had ever made him nervous like this. Because today was different. Today he would sit across from his son properly for the first time. The waiter approached politely. Sir, would you like to order first? Kelvin shook his head immediately. I'll wait. The waiter nodded and walked away. Kelvin looked down at the small toy car resting on the table. He bought it that morning after spending almost an hour inside a children's store completely confused about what 5-year-old boys liked. At one point he nearly broke down emotionally inside the shop while staring at school bags and toys. 5 years. 5 birthdays missed. 5 years of laughter missed. 5 years of hearing his son call another place home. Regret followed him everywhere now. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, Adesuwa sat quietly inside her car while Jason talked excitedly beside her. "Mommy, where are we going?" "To meet someone." "Who?" Adesuwa looked through the windshield silently for a moment. Then she answered carefully. "Someone important." Jason accepted the answer innocently. Children trusted easily when they felt safe. That truth made Adesuwa emotional sometimes. Because despite everything life had done to her, Jason still grew up feeling protected and loved. She thanked Olo for that constantly. Before stepping out of the car, she turned toward him. "Remember your manners, okay?" Jason grinned. "Yes, Mommy." They entered the cafe together moments later. The moment Kelvin saw them, his chest tightened again painfully. Jason looked even more like him in daylight. The same walk. The same eyes. Even the way he observed the environment carefully felt familiar. Kelvin stood up immediately. Adesuwa nodded politely toward him. "Hello." Kelvin's voice almost failed. "Hello." Jason stared curiously at the stranger standing before them. Then Kelvin slowly crouched slightly to Jason's height. "Hi." Jason hid partly behind Adesuwa's arm shyly. Kelvin's heart broke softly at the sight. His own son behaved like he was a stranger. Because he was one. Kelvin forced a gentle smile. "What's your name?" Jason answered quietly. "Jason." "That's a nice name." Jason nodded proudly. "Mommy gave it to me." Kelvin looked up briefly at Adesuwa with emotional eyes. Then he slowly handed the toy car forward. "I got this for you." Jason looked toward Adesuwa first before collecting it carefully. "Thank you." Kelvin nearly cried again hearing the child speak politely to him. Such a simple moment. Yet it felt enormous. They sat down together afterward. At first the atmosphere felt awkward. Very awkward. Jason focused mostly on his toy while the adults struggled through heavy silence. Finally Kelvin asked softly, "What do you like doing?" Jason's eyes brightened immediately. "I like planes." Kelvin smiled genuinely for the first time in a long while. "Really?" "Yes. I want to fly one someday." Adesuwa watched quietly as Kelvin listened carefully to everything Jason said afterward. School stories. Cartoons. Favorite food. Kelvin absorbed every word like a starving man finally receiving food. At one point Jason laughed loudly while describing how he accidentally spilled paint on his teacher's shoe during art class. The sound hit Kelvin deeply. That laughter should have been part of his life all along. But he traded it away for pride and temporary luxury. The waiter finally brought food. As Jason ate happily, ketchup accidentally stained his shirt. Without thinking, Kelvin reached over with a napkin. "Careful." The fatherly instinct happened naturally. Adesuwa noticed immediately. And strangely, part of her chest tightened emotionally seeing it. Because despite everything, Kelvin looked sincere with Jason. Not fake. Not forced. Real. After lunch, Jason suddenly asked the question both adults had been quietly fearing. "Mommy." "Yes." "Why does he keep looking at me like that?" Silence entered instantly. Kelvin's heart pounded heavily. Adesuwa took a slow breath. Then she looked gently at Jason. "Because he's somebody connected to our family." Jason tilted his head curiously. "How?" Adesuwa hesitated. Kelvin quickly spoke softly. "It's okay." But Adesuwa already knew delaying the truth forever would only create confusion later. She touched Jason's hand gently. "Jason." The little boy looked up innocently. "This is your father." Everything became quiet. Completely quiet. Jason blinked several times while processing the words. Then he looked slowly toward Kelvin again. "You're my daddy." Kelvin's eyes filled immediately. "Yes." Jason looked confused rather than emotional. Children often accepted shocking truths more simply than adults. "Then why don't you live with us?" The question landed heavily. Very heavily. Kelvin opened his mouth slightly but no words came out immediately. How could he explain selfishness and betrayal to a child? Finally Adesuwa answered gently. "Sometimes adults make mistakes." Jason looked between both of them quietly. "Big mistakes?" Kelvin nodded painfully. Yes. Jason studied him carefully for a few seconds. Then unexpectedly, he asked something else. Are you still my daddy even if you made mistakes? Kelvin nearly broke apart emotionally right there. Yes, he whispered weakly. Jason accepted the answer more easily than either adult expected. Children valued presence more than pride. After a few moments, he returned to playing with the toy car casually. But Kelvin could barely function normally anymore. Hearing Jason call him daddy, even once, changed something inside him permanently. Later that afternoon, they walked together briefly outside near the waterfront. Jason ran ahead chasing birds happily while Adesuwa and Kelvin followed behind more slowly. Kelvin watched his son constantly. Almost fearfully. As if the boy might disappear again if he looked away too long. Finally he spoke quietly beside Adesuwa. Thank you. She looked at him calmly. For what? For not poisoning him against me. Adesuwa stayed silent briefly. Then she answered honestly. I almost did sometimes. Kelvin lowered his head slightly. I wouldn't have blamed you. But hatred destroys children quietly, she replied. I refuse to give Jason that kind of heart. Those words humbled Kelvin again. Everything about her strength now came from wisdom and true pain. As they continued walking, several women nearby suddenly recognized Adesuwa from the conference. Oh my God, that's Adesuwa Daniels. They approached excitedly asking for pictures politely. Adesuwa smiled kindly and agreed. Kelvin stepped aside quietly watching the scene. Pride entered his chest unexpectedly. Not romantic pride. Respect. The woman he once underestimated had become admired by people everywhere. And she achieved it without destroying herself emotionally. After the women left, Jason grabbed Kelvin's hand suddenly while pointing excitedly toward boats nearby. Daddy, look. The word hit Kelvin so hard emotionally that he froze briefly. Daddy. Not stranger. Not mister. Daddy. His eyes became wet immediately. Jason did not even notice. He kept talking excitedly while pulling Kelvin closer toward the water. Adesuwa watched both of them quietly from behind. 6 months later, life looked completely different again. Not perfect. But peaceful. And after everything they survived, peace itself felt like a blessing. Adesuwa officially expanded her company into Nigeria. Her Lagos office opened successfully with investors and media personalities attending the launch event. Business magazines now called her one of the fastest rising African entrepreneurs in branding and digital strategy. But despite all the success around her, the achievement that mattered most to her was much simpler. Jason was happy. That alone made every painful year worth surviving. Meanwhile, Kelvin slowly rebuilt his relationship with his son carefully and patiently. Not with expensive gifts. Not with fake promises. But with presence. Every weekend he visited. Every school event he attended. Every birthday he showed up early. At first Jason behaved shyly around him. Then slowly, naturally, love started growing between father and son. One evening inside the playground, Jason sat on Kelvin's shoulders laughing loudly while pointing toward the sky. Daddy, higher. Kelvin laughed genuinely while lifting him slightly. Careful, Captain. Adesuwa watched quietly from nearby. And for the first time in many years, bitterness no longer controlled her heart. Pain still existed sometimes. But pain no longer ruled her life. That was the real victory. One night after dropping Jason home, Kelvin stood awkwardly near the doorway while Adesuwa prepared tea inside the kitchen. The atmosphere between them had become calmer over the months. Not romantic. Not hostile. Simply mature. Kelvin watched her quietly for a moment before speaking. You really changed many lives. Adesuwa looked up briefly. What do you mean? I saw your foundation online. A year earlier, Adesuwa had started a support foundation for abandoned women and struggling single mothers across Ghana and Nigeria. Women received small business training, emotional support, temporary shelter, financial education. Because Adesuwa never forgot what it felt like to stand alone without help. She stirred her tea slowly. I just didn't want other women to feel hopeless the way I once did. Kelvin lowered his eyes. You turned pain into purpose. Those words touched her quietly. Because deep inside, that was exactly what happened. The suffering that almost destroyed her eventually built the strongest version of herself. Kelvin spoke again softly. I still regret everything. Adesuwa nodded calmly. I know. Silence entered briefly. Then Kelvin asked carefully. Do you think you'll ever trust somebody again? Adesuwa smiled faintly. Maybe someday. Kelvin looked at her with quiet sadness. But this time he accepted reality differently. Some losses could not be reversed. Some doors closed forever. And maturity meant respecting that truth. He gave a small nod. You deserve happiness. Adesuwa looked at him carefully. Then she answered honestly. So do you? Just not at the cost of somebody else's peace. Kelvin smiled painfully. That lesson nearly destroyed my life before I understood it. Outside, Jason suddenly ran into the living room holding his school drawing excitedly. Mommy. Daddy. Look. Both adults immediately turned toward him. Jason proudly opened the paper. It showed 3 people standing together beneath a bright sun. A mother. A father. A child. Not a perfect family. But still a family in its own way. Kelvin stared at the drawing emotionally. Then Jason pointed proudly. That's us. Adesuwa felt tears rise briefly inside her eyes. Not from sadness. But from gratitude. Because despite all the broken pieces, Jason still grew up surrounded by love instead of hatred. And maybe that itself was a miracle. Years ago, Adesuwa stood alone in the rain believing her life had ended. But life was only beginning. The rejection that almost buried her became the reason she discovered her own strength. The betrayal that broke her heart taught her wisdom. And the child she once carried helplessly inside her womb became the reason she refused to give up. As for Kelvin, life humbled him completely. Not through revenge. Not through destruction. But through regret. Because sometimes the greatest punishment is living long enough to understand the value of what you lost. One Sunday morning, Adesuwa stood before hundreds of women during one of her foundation conferences in Accra. Some women in the audience were crying already while listening to her story. Others held notebooks tightly while writing down every word. Adesuwa looked across the hall calmly before speaking into the microphone. Never allow rejection to convince you that your life is finished. The room became completely quiet. Sometimes the people who walk away from you are only making space for the destiny Allah prepared ahead. Several women wiped tears immediately. Adesuwa smiled softly. You are stronger than the pain you survived. Loud applause filled the hall. And somewhere near the back of the audience, Kelvin stood quietly beside Jason watching her proudly. Not as the husband who won her back. But as the man who finally understood her worth too late. Jason looked up at him. Daddy. Yes. Mommy is amazing. Kelvin smiled emotionally. Yes. His voice became softer. She really is. Outside the building, the evening sun slowly covered the city with golden light. And for the first time in many years, everyone finally found peace in different ways. Not the kind of peace that comes from money. But the kind that comes after surviving pain honestly. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support more emotional African family drama stories like this. Tell us in the comments. What lesson did you learn from Adesuwa and Kelvin's story? See you in the next story.